It was supposed to be a celebration. That's how they pitched it anyway. A soft spring evening at the Grantwood estate, trimmed hedges and lantern-lit paths, champagne on silver trays, Noelle's name scripted on everything from napkins to menus like she was royalty. And in a way, she was, the daughter of Clarissa Grant, heiress of charm and venom, and me, the man history had rewritten as an embarrassing footnote. I knew the moment I stepped onto the estate grounds that I didn't belong. I could feel it in the way the valet took my keys like he was doing me a favor, in the way heads turned, but no one made room. It wasn't my world anymore. Maybe it never was. But I came. For Noelle. She had texted the day before, brief, almost reluctant. I know it's awkward, but you can come. Just keep things peaceful, please. I didn't ask what that meant. I just showed up, clean shave, dark blazer, the same cologne I wore the day she was born. I stood near the edge of the lawn by the hedges, holding a flute of something dry and expensive I barely sipped. Noelle had looked beautiful, radiant. Her smile was quick, nervous. When she saw me, it softened just for a moment. That was enough. Then came the moment. I'd made the mistake of moving toward the garden archway to take a photo of the string lights when I saw her, Clarissa, my ex-wife. Still as impeccably groomed and emotionally frigid as the day she told me I didn't fit the narrative anymore. She had a way of entering a room like a curtain of perfume and frost. Her heels struck the cobblestone like gavel hits. She'd spotted me from across the lawn and made a beeline, drink in one hand, and her mother's silver bracelet glittering on the other. I didn't brace myself. I should have. You don't get to loiter around like a proud father, she hissed as she reached me, voice low but sharp. You're not my husband anymore. I'm Noelle's father, I said calmly. That hasn't changed. Clarissa's eyes narrowed like a lens focusing for a kill shot. And then she raised her voice. You're not my husband anymore. She barked loud enough to halt the string quartet mid-song. Heads turned. Some gasped. Some whispered. Some smiled. And then she shoved me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe she'd had just enough to drink. Or maybe she knew exactly what she was doing. Either way, I lost my footing. The marble edge of the fountain was slick beneath my loafers. My arms windmilled. I tried to steady myself on the wrought iron rim, but it was too late. I plunged in backward, arms flailing, spine slapping the water with a splash loud enough to echo across the lawn. Cold, chlorinated water swallowed me whole for a moment before I bobbed back up, soaked and stunned, like a washed-up extra from a bad sitcom. The silence broke quickly. Gasps turned to laughter. Laughter turned to applause. I heard someone say, "He's lucky we even let him in." I sat there, water dripping down my face, my shirt plastered to my chest, blazer floating like a sad cape around me. Somewhere, a waiter whispered, "Should I help him out?" And someone else snorted, "Let him marinate." And that's when I smiled. I didn't stand. I didn't flail. I just sat up straight in the water, my arms resting on the edge of the fountain like a man enjoying a casual soak. I looked at Clarissa, mascara perfectly intact, rage blooming in her chest like wildfire. I looked past her, too, at Noelle, who stood frozen in her pale yellow dress, jaw slack, a champagne flute trembling in her hand. At Dominic, her fiancé, awkwardly trying to decide if he should step in. At Clarissa's father, Judge Conrad Grant, who watched me with the same bored contempt he wore at our divorce hearing. Then I said just one thing. Clear. Calm. Almost casual. Remember this moment. The laughter died fast. Not all at once, but like a candle guttering out in a draft. Some chuckles lingered, unsure of themselves. A few guests looked away. Clarissa opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. Maybe it was the smile. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the way I didn't scream, didn't rage, didn't crawl. Just sat there. Dignified. Dangerous. A waiter finally moved, offering me a hand. I took it. My shoes squished as I stepped out of the water, droplets falling like punctuation marks around me. I peeled off my blazer and laid it neatly over a nearby chair. Someone tried to offer me a towel. I waved it off. I walked past Clarissa without a glance, water dripping down my slacks and into her carefully manicured grass. She flinched, just slightly, as though my wet presence might stain her air. I walked back to my post near the hedges and picked up my barely touched champagne flute. And I waited. They had no idea what was coming. They thought the fountain was the punchline, the peak of humiliation. But for me, it was only the start. The fountain didn't break me. It baptized me. The wet blazer still clung to my skin like a second insult. I'd refused the towel they offered, not out of pride, but because I didn't want anything from them. The laughs had faded. The whispers had turned. I stood at the edge of the lawn, watching them pretend I wasn't there, as if I could be erased with enough champagne and piano music. Clarissa had disappeared back into the tent, probably to spin a version of the fountain story that made her the victim. That was her way, always the fragile heroine in her own theater of cruelty. But I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to demand anything, because I hadn't come here to win their approval. I had come to deliver the answer to a question they hadn't dared ask. What happens when the man you discarded stops playing along? The first sign was the silence. It rolled in slow, like fog on a battlefield. Guests stopped mid-sentence, turning toward the gates. Even the musicians, unsure whether they should resume playing or remain frozen in awkward anticipation, turned their heads. The estate gates creaked open. You could hear it all the way across the lawn, an old, groaning metal song that echoed through the manicured hedges and clipped perfection of the Grantwood property. Everyone's heads turned, eyes narrowing toward the source like curious deer sensing a predator nearby. And then the car appeared. Not just any car. A black Mercedes Maybach, long and low to the ground, its polished frame gleaming beneath the string lights like it had been born from shadow and wax. Behind it, two more dark vehicles, quiet, seamless, in sync. Not limos, not hired Ubers. These weren't for show. They were for precision. The kind of arrival that doesn't announce itself with noise, but with power. Clarissa emerged from the tent just in time to see the back door of the lead car swing open. And out stepped Corin Dray, sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. Three-piece charcoal gray suit, marbled cufflinks, and that expression he always wore. Like he'd already read every move you were going to make and decided it wasn't worth blinking for. Corin wasn't just my lawyer. He was my scalpel, my sword, my silence weaponized. People turned at each other, asking in hushed tones who he was. You could hear the ripple. That's Corin Dray. Wait, is that the Corin Dray? He's the guy who handled that offshore property case in Geneva. No. That's the guy who got that pharmaceutical CEO out of a billion-dollar fraud trial. What's he doing here? Corin didn't acknowledge them. His eyes were on me. Calm, cool, focused. Then the rear door of the second car opened. Tessa Quill stepped out like she was walking into a boardroom she already owned. All black, hair swept into a loose knot, her heels clicking softly on the estate's gravel path. She didn't smile. Tessa never smiled when she worked. She was half business advisor, half investigator, and fully uninterested in anyone's opinion. She nodded once at me before walking up beside Corin. That was the moment the laughter died for good. Clarissa's smirk evaporated. Her hand tightened around the flute she was holding. She turned to her father, the old judge, as if to ask what he knew. He looked just as confused. Good, because they were about to understand just how far behind they'd fallen. Corin approached me first. He didn't comment on my soaked shirt or my dripping shoes. He simply handed me a fresh navy blazer, pressed and folded, with a silk pocket square in the exact shade of La Crest blue. It wasn't just a change of clothes. It was a reminder. I was never out of moves. Corin turned toward the crowd. No microphone. No raised voice. He didn't need one. The hush was so complete. He could have whispered, and they still would have heard every syllable. Mr. Locke has a few documents to present, Corin said, his voice calm and rich, like velvet hiding a blade. You could feel the pulse of panic skip through the crowd. People shifted, murmured. A few looked to Clarissa. She was frozen. Tessa stepped forward, opening a leather-bound folder. She held it against one arm like a judge presenting evidence. Her eyes scanned the lawn, stopping briefly on Clarissa, then Mason, Clarissa's brother, and finally the judge. She didn't blink. We'll be brief, she said, tone clipped and precise, but thorough. Clarissa stepped forward, her heels stabbing the grass. This is a private event. You don't have the right to. Corin held up a hand. Please don't interrupt. You're still in possession of company property and pending assets. That makes this very much our business. My former in-laws looked like a jury being caught with evidence in their pockets. Noelle had moved closer to Dominic, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Her eyes flicked between her mother and me, something flickering in them I hadn't seen in years, curiosity. Maybe even something like hope. Clarissa scoffed, trying to regain her footing. This is a stunt. An embarrassment. No, I said quietly, stepping forward, wearing the fresh blazer like armor. That was the fountain. This is something else. Corin reached into the folder and withdrew the first envelope. Legal notifications, he said. Filed, stamped, and served. No one moved. Tessa added, "This isn't a party anymore." And that was the moment it shifted. The laughter didn't return. The derision didn't flare up again. People stopped seeing me as the man who fell into a fountain and started seeing me as something else, something they hadn't accounted for. Clarissa's expression didn't change, but her hand trembled slightly. Just enough. That was enough for me, because they thought the fall was the end, but it was just the start of their descent. Clarissa was still reeling. I could see it in the way her nostrils flared, in how she kept glancing toward her father like she needed him to regain control of a room she thought belonged to her. She always thrived on theatrics, her voice, her wardrobe, her timing. But this wasn't her stage anymore, and she was beginning to feel it. Corin turned toward her, calm as ever, and handed her a sealed manila envelope. The kind of envelope that smells like law offices and ruined legacies. He didn't say much, just enough. "Official notification," he said, his voice steady, barely raised. Clarissa took the envelope with 2 fingers, like it might be contaminated. "What is this?" "Your future," Corin said. "Or what's left of it." I watched her tear it open. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and I could see the way her posture changed, rigid spine, shoulders angling defensively. She was bracing for impact, but the blow was already in motion. "Effective immediately," Corin continued, "you are no longer the majority owner of Lockcrest Media." She looked up slowly, her face blank, but I could see the panic behind her eyes. "You're bluffing." "I don't bluff," Corin replied, folding his hands neatly in front of him. "We spent the past 18 months acquiring controlling interests through holding entities and private shareholders. All legal. All documented." She blinked hard. "Impossible. I would have known." "No," I said quietly, stepping forward. "You wouldn't have. Because you weren't looking. You were too busy painting me as obsolete to notice the foundation shifting beneath you." Clarissa's gaze snapped to me, fury blooming in her cheeks. "You think you can just waltz back in and take what I built?" "I'm not taking anything," I said. "I'm reclaiming what was always mine. The difference is, I didn't need a headline to do it." Behind her, Mason approached, her brother, the eternal yes-man. He tried to snatch the documents from her hand, but Corin blocked him with a single, subtle step. Tessa moved in too, her presence quiet but unmistakable. "You're going to regret this," Mason hissed, glaring at me like a schoolyard bully unprepared for someone who studied law and revenge in equal measure. "Regret?" I asked. "No, I already did that. I regretted giving you all the benefit of the doubt. I regretted letting my name get buried in your narrative. I regretted thinking loyalty was louder than ambition. But now, I don't feel a thing." Clarissa tried to laugh. It came out brittle, hollow. "You're trying to embarrass me in front of Noelle. That's all this is." I turned slowly to face my daughter, who stood a few feet away in her pale yellow dress. Her expression caught somewhere between shock and awe. "Noelle," I said, "this isn't about embarrassing anyone. It's about truth. You deserve to know what's really going on in this family. What's been hidden behind curated images and press statements." She didn't respond. Not yet. But she didn't look away either. Clarissa finally barked. "This doesn't change anything." But that's where she was wrong. It changed everything. 2 years ago, I was living in a rented apartment off Arbor Lane with a broken credit score and a box of court papers that felt like a coffin. Clarissa had taken the house, the cars, the public sympathy, and worst of all, my daughter's distance. People said I should move on, find peace, write a memoir, and let the dust settle. But I don't believe in letting anything settle that was built on lies. So I rebuilt. Quietly. Carefully. While they laughed at the idea of me consulting for boutique firms, I bought into them. When they said I'd never touch Lockcrest again, I started acquiring small shares through offshore proxies. A trust in Cyprus. A holding firm in the Caymans. A shell company based out of Luxembourg. They were puzzles only someone like Corin could assemble, and he did. Tessa came later. A former corporate auditor with an intuition for deceit. She found the gaps in Clarissa's paperwork. The unreported bonuses. The irregular deposits. She traced every dollar Clarissa moved to keep her socialite status intact, including the ones she used to fund this very party. I didn't need to crash the engagement party. I owned the rights to the tablecloths and the marquee, and now everyone here knew it. Mason tried again, louder this time. This is fraud. You orchestrated this behind our backs. Corin tilted his head. No. What you're describing is called strategy. What Clarissa did with company funds. That's fraud. Clarissa stiffened. Watch what you say, or I'll sue. Tessa pulled another document from the folder. You might want to read this before you get litigious. Clarissa snatched it and scanned the lines. I saw the moment the blood drained from her face. Corin leaned in slightly, his voice low. That's the internal audit you never thought anyone would authorize. It shows how you funneled over $600,000 into non-business accounts for personal use. Engagement party included. You can't prove that. Oh, we can, Tessa said. Your name is on every transfer. And we have the emails. The murmurs in the crowd surged again, louder this time. Guests looked at each other like they were finally realizing the evening wasn't about candlelight and romance anymore. It was a corporate earthquake dressed in formal wear. Clarissa opened her mouth, closed it. She looked at her father again, the judge, the man who had backed her through every dirty move. But even he couldn't stop this. He just sat there, jaw clenched, the weight of reputation finally pressing down on him. You thought the divorce gave you control, I said, my voice calm, low. It gave you what you asked for, but not what was underneath. Clarissa stepped back. Just one step. But it was all I needed. That was the step of someone who realized they weren't the hunter anymore. They were the hunted. They didn't know who I was anymore. But to be fair, they never really did. Standing there, surrounded by half-frozen champagne flutes and whispers that now carried a sharper edge, I felt more grounded than I had in years. Clarissa's face, twisted with disbelief, was the same face I'd once watched laugh in court as the judge handed her most of our assets. Her family had always treated me like the outsider, presentable enough for holidays, just charming enough for public photos, but never worthy of a seat at their true table. Not the decision-making table. Not the legacy table. And I'd accepted that, once. The weight of being less than draped over me like a suit that never quite fit. But all of that was before the fall. Not the fountain. The real fall. The divorce. The financial scorched earth policy they called a settlement. The day I left my own house with nothing but my name and a black duffel bag. That was the moment I stopped playing their game and started building my own. 5 years ago, I stood at the threshold of a one-bedroom apartment with no heat and peeling paint, holding that duffel bag like it still meant I had something to offer the world. I slept on a futon for 2 years, never once complaining, not even when the winter air bit through the cracks in the window frame. I didn't have much, but I had clarity, and time, and something far more dangerous than rage. Silence. Silence lets you observe. Silence lets you build. I started small consulting gigs for struggling businesses, strategy calls for up-and-coming tech firms too green to know their own worth. Most paid me in equity, some in late checks and handshake promises. I kept all the receipts, every slide deck I made, every dollar I reinvested. I watched companies fail and grow. I learned what made people desperate. I learned what made people reckless. And I took notes on every one. It started with one shell company, then 3, then a portfolio of 12 silent partnerships, all layered beneath Locke Strategic Holdings, a name I chose deliberately. I wanted it to sound like a legacy, and maybe because it was, just not the one they expected. While Clarissa held her galas and recited carefully crafted interviews about weathering her past, I was buying into boardrooms, quietly, legally, and methodically. The key wasn't revenge. It was anonymity. Every acquisition was a chess move. Every fund a pressure point. I wasn't chasing her. I was moving right under her, laying the groundwork for the kind of coup that never made headlines until it was already done. I still remember the day I bought the first batch of Lockcrest Media shares. Only 2% through a proxy firm in Dublin. Barely a whisper. But that was the crack in the dam. Over the next 18 months, I used every contact I had. Former partners, disillusioned shareholders, quiet dissenters in the company Clarissa thought she owned. Some of them sold just to spite her. Others had no idea who they were really selling to. It didn't matter. Piece by piece, I reclaimed what she never deserved. Corin found the final key. An overlooked clause in the post-divorce business division. Contract that Clarissa's lawyers never read closely enough. It allowed for restructuring if controlling interest changed hands. A clause that had sat dormant until I hit 51%, and then 62%. That was 72 hours ago. The morning I crossed the threshold, I stood in my office, a minimalist floor in a downtown high-rise, the walls lined with glass, not portraits. I wasn't interested in showcasing what I'd built. I was interested in what was still left to take. Tessa was already there, tablet in hand, coffee steaming beside her. "It's time," she'd said without looking up. "Everything filed?" I asked. She nodded. "Filed, timestamped, secured. The transfer emails went out an hour ago. Board notices are on their desks." Corin had stepped in a moment later, a thick folder in hand. "Shall we save the date?" I didn't smile. I just said, "Noelle's engagement party. They won't expect it." There had been a brief pause. Long enough for Tessa to glance up, her expression unreadable. "You're sure?" she asked. "Absolutely. Because I didn't want a press conference. I didn't want a boardroom coup. I wanted a garden filled with champagne and artifice. I wanted the same curated elegance they had always used to make me feel small. And I wanted to reclaim it, not with a bang, but with a signature. Now, standing under the same string lights they once toasted under without me, I wasn't thinking about humiliation. I wasn't thinking about the fountain or the gasp of guests. I was thinking about the woman who once told me I was lucky to be married to her. The woman who told me, "You're not built for empire." The woman who now stood shaking with an envelope in her hand, while the empire around her cracked beneath the weight of its own ego. They didn't know who I was anymore, but they were learning. Every whispered conversation. Every side-eye from a guest trying to gauge which side of history to stand on. Every dry mouth swallowing regret. Clarissa wasn't used to being outplayed. She didn't know how to handle it. She moved like a cornered animal, nostrils flaring, smile plastered over panic, trying to spin a new reality faster than the old one fell apart. "None of this changes what people think of you," she hissed when she finally reached me again. "You're still the man I left." "No," I said, quietly. "I'm the man you didn't see coming." She opened her mouth to retort, but I stepped around her, leaving only the scent of ink and precision in my wake. I looked up and met Noelle's eyes. She was watching, really watching. The kind of look that strips years off memory and makes you hope. I didn't wave. I didn't explain. I just nodded once and walked back to where Corin and Tessa stood waiting. Because foundations don't need applause. They just need to hold until everything else collapses. The scent of jasmine and wine lingered in the air, clinging to the tension that now stretched across the lawn like a taut wire. Moments ago, the guests had been raising toasts, posing under fairy lights, clinking glasses over shrimp canapes. Now, they stood in uncertain clusters, champagne half-lifted, conversations paused mid-sentence, faces turned toward me in the small storm I brought with me. I stepped forward, the soft squish of my damp shoes meeting the manicured grass the only sound in the brief hush. I wasn't just reclaiming space, I was shifting the axis of the entire evening. I looked directly at the string quartet, whose instruments still rested awkwardly in their laps after Clarissa's earlier outburst. "You can stop playing," I said flatly. "This engagement party is being recorded." Some guests laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. Clarissa didn't. She snapped her head toward me, expression twisted with disbelief. "You're insane. This is harassment." Then Corin stepped up beside me, holding a tri-folded document with a gold seal and a judge's stamp. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately. No flourish. Just weight. Legitimacy. Finality. "This," he said, holding it high enough for Clarissa and her father to see, "is a court-approved authorization for emergency shareholder disclosures in a setting involving disputed corporate assets." "What the hell does that mean?" Mason spat, eyes darting to his father, who now stood ramrod straight with a face carved from courtroom marble. Corin continued, tone like a scalpel. "It means this isn't a party anymore. It's an emergency shareholder meeting. And this property," he gestured around us, to the elegant tent, the rented stage, the manicured garden with its tailored hedges, was paid for in part by misappropriated corporate funds belonging to Loch Crest Media. "Which means this estate is now under formal dispute." Gasps. Murmurs. A glass shattered somewhere behind me. Clarissa's eyes blazed. "This is a celebration for our daughter, not some circus for your ego." I stepped closer to her, calm, unblinking. "You made it a circus when you paid for it with money that didn't belong to you. You just assumed no one would ever trace it." Clarissa turned to her father. "Dad, say something." Judge Conrad Grant looked down at the document, reading the highlighted sections, scanning the signatures. His jaw flexed, but he said nothing. And that silence? It was louder than any verdict he'd ever given from the bench. Mason pushed forward. You're just bitter because you lost the divorce. You're jealous. This is just performance. No, I replied. This is accountability. You all thought you could gut me in court, parade me out of my own life, and dance on the ashes. I let you write me off as irrelevant. And while you laughed and misused company funds to inflate your image, I rebuilt. You used La Crest as your personal piggy bank. And I took it back piece by piece, quietly, legally. Now we're here. This isn't personal. It's business. Tessa joined us then, holding up her tablet. Would you like me to begin the disclosure summary? Clarissa shouted. This is still my daughter's engagement party. Tessa looked at her, completely unshaken. That's unfortunate. Because according to the financial logs you authorized, this party is listed under a board-approved public relations initiative. Which means it's company property. Which means it's our concern. Dominic, Noelle's fiancé, stepped forward from the crowd. His tie was slightly loosened, his hands in his pockets like he was balancing anger and uncertainty. Is this actually legal? Corin turned to him, expression neutral. Absolutely. And your presence here as a potential beneficiary of La Crest's standing makes you a relevant party under the shareholder ethics code. Noelle's hand found Dominic's arm. He's not attacking us, she said quietly. He's fixing something. Clarissa lunged toward her. Don't you dare take his side. But Noelle stepped back. Your side isn't what I thought it was. The air shifted again. It was subtle, but unmistakable. I wasn't just a soaked man in a blazer anymore. I was the storm they hadn't seen coming. Corin took a few steps toward the crowd. To clarify for all guests present, this disclosure will not involve names that aren't on record, and it will not involve any statements that haven't been court-cleared. We're simply here to inform relevant parties of discrepancies that affect company assets and legal ownership. You're free to leave, but if you choose to stay, you are now observers in an active shareholder deposition. I turned slowly and addressed the room, not with anger, but with clarity. For years, I was painted as the one who failed, who walked away. But I didn't walk. I was pushed out of my marriage, out of the boardroom I helped build, out of my daughter's life. And I took it. I wore it. But I didn't disappear. I turned toward Clarissa, who now looked pale. She still had her arms crossed, still wearing that mask of defiance, but her eyes were flickering, searching for a foothold that no longer existed. This moment, I said, isn't about revenge. It's about record and transparency. Two things this family has long avoided. Corin nodded. Shall we proceed? I glanced once toward Noelle. Her expression wasn't just surprise anymore. It was something deeper. Maybe recognition. Maybe regret. Yes, I said. Let's begin. Tessa connected the tablet to a portable monitor set up near the tent's entrance. Likely originally intended for a slideshow of Noelle's childhood photos. Instead, it now displayed a spreadsheet. Columns, line items, transfer histories, account numbers. And with each new transaction revealed, the narrative cracked. Clarissa tried once more to interject, her voice shaking this time. This is still my daughter's party, but Judge Grant finally spoke. Clarissa, stop. She froze. He didn't raise his voice, didn't even look at her. But in those 3 words, the entire estate trembled. Because the law, her lifelong shield, was no longer on her side. She wasn't the judge's daughter anymore. She was just another defendant. I stood beneath the lanterns that had once lit laughter and toasts, but now illuminated nothing but exposed truth. Clarissa's face had gone pale, her jaw clenched so tight I wondered if she could even hear the sound of her empire crumbling around her. She was still trying to recover control, to wrestle the evening back into the polished fantasy she'd crafted for so long. But it was too late. I stepped up onto the small riser meant for the engagement speeches. My dress shoes, still damp from the fountain, left faint marks on the polished wood. The microphone waited on its silver stand, intended for Clarissa's father to bless the union, for Noelle to say a few tearful words, for toasts and camera flashes and declarations of eternal joy. Instead, I reached for it. The murmurs dropped to a hush again. This time, there was no confusion in their silence. Just anticipation. A strange hunger. People love watching power shift, especially when it doesn't belong to them. I tapped the mic once, let the brief feedback sting the air, and then looked directly at my daughter. Noelle, I said softly, but clearly, I'm sorry, this isn't the engagement party you imagined. I know what it was supposed to be. A celebration of love, family, a future. She stood a few feet from the tent, Dominic at her side, her hand curled lightly around his forearm. Her eyes, deep brown like mine, held everything. Conflict, uncertainty, and something else. Stillness. I turned to the rest of the guests. But if we're going to talk about a future, then we need to start with the truth. No smoke. No mirrors. I let that settle before shifting my gaze. I found Dominic in the crowd, his stance square, his expression guarded. His father stood beside him, lean, salt-haired, with the cautious posture of a man trying to decide if he was watching an implosion or an opening act. I locked eyes with Dominic. Do your parents know, I asked, how this family has treated me? The man who raised Noelle? The man who showed up for recitals, birthday parties, every scraped knee and science fair, even after I was dragged out of my own home. Dominic didn't blink. They do now. His voice didn't carry anger, just understanding. A quiet kind of allegiance I didn't expect, but appreciated. Clarissa surged forward, heels striking the stone like war drums. This is not the time for this. You're humiliating yourself. I turned to her calmly. Clarissa, this stopped being about me the moment you used company funds to manufacture this illusion. You turned a family milestone into a PR stunt. You invited everyone except the truth. You're using our daughter's engagement to air your grievances. I cut her off. Not with volume, but with finality. No, I'm using this moment to reclaim what was stolen. My voice, my integrity, my place in a family that tried to erase me. I looked back to Dominic. I'm not here to undermine your engagement. I'm here to make sure the man marrying my daughter sees clearly that you know what stands behind the curtain. Not just the curated photos and the floral arrangements, but the rod in the foundation. His mother, elegant, wearing a sapphire dress and pearls, stepped forward gently. We'd heard things, she said, but we assumed they were exaggerated. Clarissa's family presented a very different picture. I nodded. They always did. And I let them. For years, I stayed silent for Noelle's sake. I let them distort who I was because I believed one day she'd come looking for the truth on her own. Clarissa tried again to grab the mic, but Tessa stepped forward just in time. Her hand didn't need to touch Clarissa, just hovered in warning. That was enough. Clarissa stepped back like she'd been slapped. I turned to my daughter. Noelle, I wasn't the perfect husband, but I was always your father. And when I lost everything, when your mother painted me as an afterthought, I never stopped showing up for you, even when I had to stand in the shadows of my own life. She was crying now, not sobbing, not dramatic, just quiet tears, like something long buried was breaking open inside her. I held the mic in one hand and opened my other palm toward her. You don't owe me anything. I didn't do this tonight to win you over. I did it to stop lying by omission. Because silence can protect a child, but it can also suffocate the truth. Clarissa tried to speak again. She doesn't want your guilt trip, Dominic interrupted her. Clarissa, enough. The words stunned her into silence. Dominic stepped forward, his hand dropping from Noelle's. This day was about celebrating Noelle and building something honest together. But if you're telling me the people around her have built their lives on manipulation, then I want to know. I need to know. I nodded at him. Then you're already a better man than I was at your age. That made him pause, then nod. Clarissa's father stepped toward the stage, his face rigid with disapproval. This isn't the forum for this. It's the exact forum, I replied. Because this party was never just a celebration. It was a performance, one paid for with stolen funds, draped in false smiles, and hosted by a family who forgot that the truth doesn't need an invitation. Judge Grant didn't reply. He turned and walked off, slowly, as though a lifetime of control had finally rusted through. I stepped down from the riser. Noelle met me halfway. She didn't say anything at first, just wrapped her arms around me like it was instinct. Like the years of distance between us collapsed into this single, quiet moment. You didn't ruin the party, she whispered. You saved the story. Behind us, the lights flickered. The music hadn't returned. The guests hadn't resumed their clinking glasses. They were watching something they never thought they'd see. A man they once laughed at, standing calm in the eye of the storm with the truth finally on his side. And the real father-in-law finally acknowledged. It didn't take long. By morning, the headlines had already surfaced. Local outlets, then regional. By noon, it had gone national. A photo of me, drenched in water, hair slicked back, standing calmly at the edge of the marble fountain with my hands resting on the stone like I belonged there. Because I did. A frozen moment in time that once would have been the punchline of the week. But now, attached to the words shareholder coup and corporate fraud probe, it became something else entirely. Powerful. The internet loves a fall, but it loves a resurrection even more. The first article titled it, "The Fountain Fall Heard Around the Boardroom." Another called it, "From Soaked to Sovereign." One of my favorites, Clarissa Grant's party crashes itself. But it wasn't just the photo or the drama that caught fire. It was the truth that followed. The documents, the footage, the audit. And it was all real. We hadn't edited anything. We hadn't needed to. The numbers spoke loud enough. Tessa's forensic trail, paired with Corin's precision in legal framing, laid bare what the Grant family had hidden behind their manicured brand for years. Clarissa's misuse of Lockcrest Media funds was no longer speculation, it was itemized fact. Dozens of expense reports masked as community engagement or employee development that turned out to be personal luxuries. Spa weekends, estate renovations, designer contracts for Noelle's engagement party that were, embarrassingly, run through a company wellness budget. It was one thing to misappropriate funds. It was another to do it with such arrogance. Corin filed the hearing request by 9 a.m. sharp. I didn't even have to be there in person. He preferred it that way. Let the optics speak, he told me. You've already done the part that matters. So, I sat in my office downtown, sunlight slicing through the blinds like gold bars on the floor, and watched the live stream like a man watching history course correct itself. Clarissa tried to speak at first. Always the orator, always sure the room belonged to her. But the hearing was tight, controlled. Every time she raised her voice or tried to inject emotion, the chairwoman interrupted with, "We'll get to that. Please stay with the facts." And the facts gutted her. Tessa walked the board through the timeline. Receipts, bank transfers, even metadata from PDF edits. Everything connected. Each expense Clarissa had filed under the company ledger came with an annotated counterpart, proof of where the money actually went. The engagement party's garden rental, paid through the Lockcrest Wellness and Cultural Enrichment Division. The crystal chandeliers strung above the tent, filed as conference lighting. Even the champagne tower had been labeled as client entertainment. By the time the third slide came up on screen, the room had gone still. Not just the board, not just the Grant family's internal counsel, but the entire live stream audience watching it unfold like a corporate Greek tragedy. Clarissa broke somewhere near the 45-minute mark. "You people have no idea the pressure I'm under," she snapped. "Do you think it's easy preserving the image of a family falling apart?" Tessa didn't flinch. "That may be true, but you don't get to preserve an image with money that wasn't yours." Clarissa looked to her brother. Mason wouldn't meet her eyes. She looked to her father. He stared ahead, unmoving. For the first time, she stood alone, not just in name, but in consequence. And I didn't need to say a word. Because the silence was finally working for me. They showed the fountain video next. Not just the viral clip from a guest's phone, but the footage from Tessa's discreet camera. A wide angle. Clear audio. Clarissa shouting. The shove. The splash. The laughter. The gasps. Then my voice, echoing in the stillness, "Remember this moment." It echoed again in the courtroom replay like a prophecy. I saw it all from my office. I watched as the story they thought would humiliate me became the one that unraveled them. And I didn't smile. I just sat still, feeling the weight of it all. Not joy, not revenge, but a quiet kind of justice that doesn't ask for applause. By late afternoon, the board voted to suspend Clarissa pending full investigation. She tried to argue, to pivot, to reframe. But the gavel came down, figuratively and literally, and it was done. Clarissa Grant, the woman who once kicked me out of a boardroom with a condescending wave of her hand, was now under investigation by a board she no longer controlled. The PR fallout was fast and brutal. Lockcrest's social media page disabled comments within hours. Sponsors pulled their banners from the homepage. News anchors who once fawned over Clarissa's philanthropic galas now replayed the fountain video with slow-motion captions. Even the judge, her father, came under scrutiny. His signature had authorized several discretionary spending reports. Corin made sure to reference them subtly in the hearing. Just enough to raise eyebrows. Just enough to make the old man sweat. And through it all, I said nothing. Because I didn't need to anymore. That evening, I got a call. Not from Clarissa. Not from Mason. But from Noelle. She didn't speak at first. I could hear wind, maybe from a balcony or a park bench. Then, her voice. Dad? That word, simple and soft, did more to shake me than any verdict. I'm here, I said. I saw everything, she whispered. I didn't know it was that bad. It's okay, I said. You weren't supposed to know. They made sure of that. I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner. Or see it. She paused. I guess I believed what they told me. That's what they wanted. Another pause. Is it too late to start over? I closed my eyes. No, I said. It's exactly the right time. I didn't need headlines. I didn't need the boardroom cheers or the shifting alliances. I just needed that. Because in the end, the public reckoning wasn't just about Clarissa. It was about me, finally being seen, not as the man who fell, but as the one who stood, quietly, while the world caught up. The hearing concluded, but its tremors were only beginning to ripple through the walls of Loch Crest media, and through the hearts of the people who once ruled it like a fiefdom. I didn't rush. I didn't gloat. Instead, I moved with precision. Every step, every decision, was calculated, not for vengeance, but to restore what had been quietly dismantled in my name. 3 days after the board's suspension vote, I stood in the glass conference room on the 37th floor of the Loch Strategic Holdings building, downtown. The room was bright, sun spilling across the long oak table, and at the far end sat Corin, flipping through a set of documents that would change the company's course. Tessa was beside him, expression sharp, tablet in hand, a digital trail of signatures and acquisitions lighting her screen. This is the final set, Corin said, sliding a leather folder toward me. You sign this, and it's done. 62%. Full executive control reinstated under your name. I paused, fingertips grazing the leather. The folder was heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. This was the moment. Not the moment of spectacle, not the party, or the hearing, or the social media chaos, but the quiet, personal shift that no one could take from me. Ownership. Real. Legal. Earned. I opened the folder and scanned the page. My name, printed clearly beneath the company seal, Graham Loch. Founder. Executive Chair. Majority Stakeholder. Clarissa had always thought she won because she walked away with the building, the brand, and the sympathy. But she'd never seen the foundations. The architecture beneath the name. I had spent the last 2 years rebuilding those beams until she was standing in a penthouse she didn't even realize I owned. I signed. Corin nodded, collected the documents, and handed them to a courier waiting outside. The trust is reinstated. Loch Crest's foundational clause is now under your protection, and we've restructured the board to include the original family trust as a voting member. Tessa leaned forward. That includes your daughter. I looked at her, brows raised. She doesn't even know about the trust. She will, Tessa said, by tomorrow morning. The trust. I'd buried it after the divorce. Sealed it away beneath multiple firms, not because I didn't believe in it, but because I wasn't ready to watch it fall into hands that would misuse it. Loch Crest had once been meant for Noelle. That had always been the plan. Until Clarissa and her family swept through it like locusts, leaving her future tangled in their vanity. But not anymore. I'd restored the trust. Quietly. Legally. Irrevocably. And Noelle's name was on it again. Not just symbolically, but as beneficiary, board proxy, and eventual successor. That afternoon, I invited her to meet me, neutral ground. A cafe near the water, tucked behind the marina, far from her mother's reach and the eyes of the press. She arrived 10 minutes early, wearing jeans, a gray sweater, and sunglasses large enough to hide what the last few days had probably done to her. When she saw me, she hesitated, then walked over. Hi, she said. Hi, I replied. We sat across from each other, 2 cups of tea between us, steam rising slowly into the cold air. You signed the documents? She asked. I did. So it's yours again. I didn't correct her. Not because she was wrong, but because it wasn't about possession. It was about responsibility. I've restored the original Loch family trust, I said. The one you were removed from. She blinked. I didn't know I was ever on it. You were. Until shortly after the divorce. They used a technical clause to reallocate it. You were 17, too young to contest it, too distracted by everything going on. Why didn't you say anything? I looked down at my tea. Because I didn't want you to feel like you had to choose between us. I didn't want the company to be another battlefield. You were a child. It wasn't your burden to carry. Tears rimmed her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. So what happens now? You're back on the trust, I said. Full rights. Control when you're ready. Until then, you have board voting authority. She looked stunned. I thought you hated what Lockcrest had become. I did. But that's why I couldn't leave it in their hands. She swallowed. Mom's furious. She says you manipulated everything. I didn't manipulate anything. I did what she did, only better. I just never lied about who I did it for. There was a long silence between us. A fragile moment suspended in air. Then she whispered, "Why didn't you ever tell me how bad it was?" I met her eyes. Because I didn't want to win you back with money or power. I wanted to be your father, not your strategy. And that, finally, broke through whatever wall had been standing between us. She reached across the table and took my hand. Small. Familiar. The same hand that once wrapped around my finger when she was an infant. The same hand I held through every scraped knee and dentist appointment and tearful breakup. I wish I had asked sooner, she said. I knew you would when you were ready. Later that night, Clarissa's father, Judge Conrad Grant, stood before his own legal advisory panel, grilled about signatures and authorizations tied to the trust transfers from years ago. His defense was weak, his paper trail weaker. And when Corin presented the override clause bearing his signature, dated 3 days before the trust was restructured illegally, the room shifted. You won't get away with this, he growled at me, moments before he was escorted out of the review chamber. Corin barely looked up from his notes. You already helped us do it, Judge. Your signature's on the override. Clarissa didn't show her face. She didn't call, not even to scream. Her empire had cracked, and she was buried beneath the weight of it. And for the first time in years, I slept, fully, deeply, without the ache of injustice beneath my ribs. Because I hadn't just reclaimed ownership of a company. I had given my daughter the future they tried to steal from both of us. And I did it without a single lie. I stood in the quiet of my penthouse living room, panes of floor-to-ceiling glass framing the city lights like jewels on black velvet, holding a glass of scotch I had no intention of finishing. On the coffee table lay a stack of unfiled reports, shareholder notices, and the court's final ruling on Lockcrest's ownership transfer. Tessa was still cross-referencing last-minute signatures in the adjacent study, and Corin was on the phone, giving his parting remarks to the last group of disgruntled advisors who hadn't yet come to terms with the new reality. It felt surreal, this calm after the storm. A storm I'd summoned, yes, but also one I'd weathered with deliberate composure. I'd thought revenge would feel sweet. Bitter, maybe, but undeniably sweet. Instead, it felt weightless, like stepping out of a tight coat after years of wearing it too small. Then my phone buzzed once, twice on the leather armrest. Noelle. I read her message. Can we talk? Not about today. I knew exactly what she meant. Tonight, no public spectacle. No revelations. Just father and daughter finding their way back to each other. I wiped my glass with the heel of my palm and walked to the door. Tessa, I called. I'm stepping out for a bit. She looked up, eyebrows raised. Dinner. Just some air. I gave her a half grin. Stay safe. She nodded, pocketing her tablet, and I slipped out into the elevator. The doors closed with a soft sigh, and I was alone with my thoughts as the car descended 20 floors. Outside, the city pulsed, headlights streaming, sirens distant, life unfolding without pause. I spotted a black SUV idling beneath the building's awning. Tessa's car. She must have insisted on following, though she knew I liked space. I waved her off as I walked past. I headed for the waterfront promenade, the same path where Noelle and I had our first real conversation after the engagement party fiasco. The breeze off the river was cool and carried the scent of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Street lamps cast golden halos on the pavement, and the water glimmered like molten glass. I found her near the railing, hands in the pockets of her leather jacket, staring out at the water. She turned as I approached, her hair loose, catching the wind. Hey, I said softly. Hey, she echoed. We didn't speak for a moment. Just looked at the city shimmer at our feet. Finally, I asked, need a drink? She gave a small smile. Maybe something warm. I led her to a nearby cafe, one of those hidden gems with outdoor heaters and dark wood booths. We settled into a corner table, and a waitress brought us 2 mugs of hot chocolate, hers with whipped cream, mine with a shot of espresso. Noelle took a long sip, eyes closing for a second. Thank you. For what? For everything. Tonight, you. She paused, searching for words. You stood up for me. Even when it meant tearing down everything she looked away, as though the reflection of the street felt safer than my eyes. Everything I believed about my family. No, I said. I stood up for you. I stood up for the truth. And I did it because you deserve that. You deserve to know the people you love. She nodded. I always trusted you. Even when I stopped talking to you. I trusted you. Her words hit me in my chest like a fist. I know I wasn't perfect, I said. I made mistakes. I let them push me away. I thought I was protecting you by staying silent. But maybe I was just protecting myself. She reached across the table and took my hand. You protected me from the beginning. You just did it in ways I didn't understand. We sat in silence again, our mugs warming the space between us. I thought about Clarissa, about her fury, her denial, her absence now. No apology was coming. She didn't deserve one. And the silence between us was its own rebuke. Noelle broke the silence. What will you do now? I glanced at my watch, but the hour didn't matter. What do you want me to do? She looked at me, eyebrows wary. I want my dad back. Not the strategist. Not the shareholder. Just you. I felt a flush in my throat, the kind that makes your voice catch. That's all I ever wanted. She smiled, small but real. Then let's start. I squeezed her hand. Anything you need. She hesitated. Just stay with me tomorrow. Maybe talk about something else. My trip to Spain next month. College visits. Spain, I repeated, smiling. Yeah, tell me more. She leaned back, warmed by the chocolate and the promise of normalcy. It's not just a trip. It's for my study abroad program. But I don't know if I should go. With everything that's happened, I feel like I need to be here. You need to do what's best for you, I said. If Spain is where you'll find yourself, you should go. I'll be here waiting. She nodded, biting her lip. I'll think about it. We finished our drinks. The conversation drifted to lighter topics. Books she'd been reading, a movie she wanted to see, her favorite coffee shop downtown. Normal things. Precious things. When we finally stepped back into the night air, the rain had fallen, just a sprinkle, enough to glisten on our jackets. I offered her my arm, and she linked hers through mine. Thank you, she said again. For what? For not letting me go without a fight. I paused under a lamppost, looking at her. You never did. She looked up at me, a flicker of laughter in her eyes. Good, because I don't know what I'd do without you. We walked back toward the building, footsteps echoing. I thought about the month to come, paperwork to finalize, board meetings, public announcements. But none of that felt as important as this moment. The real victory wasn't the company. It wasn't the court's final ruling. It was this, reclaiming the role I'd lost, rebuilding the bond I'd misplaced, and doing it without apology. Because some things don't need one. By the time we reached the entrance, Noelle paused. Dad, yeah? Good night. Good night, kiddo. I watched her head inside, safe and sure. Then I turned, walked to my car, and slid behind the wheel. And for the first time in a long time, I knew, without doubt, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. No apologies needed. Just the promise of tomorrow. 1 month later, the estate where I was shoved into a fountain was listed for sale. I saw the headline on a property wire at 8:30 in the morning. Grantwood Estate to be auctioned under bank order. A familiar photo accompanied the listing, the sprawling lawn, the stone fountain gleaming at its center, the balcony where Clarissa once delivered grand speeches like she was royalty. The caption below read, former home of the Grant family, now in foreclosure following financial restructuring. I didn't smile. Not right away. There was a moment, just a moment, where I closed my eyes and let the silence settle. A kind of quiet that felt deeper than peace. Final. Clarissa hadn't called. Mason hadn't reached out. Even Judge Grant had retreated into whatever retirement shell he'd built to escape the collapse. No statements. No spin. Just absence. It was perfect. I stood on the rooftop of my building, coffee in one hand, the city spread out in every direction like a world I finally owned again. Below me, cars moved like blood through arteries. Lives continued. But up here, it felt still. Balanced. Tessa stepped out from the elevator behind me, tablet in hand, sunglasses resting on her head. Her coat whipped in the spring wind. You're up early, she said, approaching with her usual half-smirk. I never sleep late, I replied. Too much noise in my head. She handed me the tablet. Next acquisition. Already in motion. Investors are waiting for green light by Friday. I scanned the document. Details of a media subsidiary we'd quietly begun circling weeks ago. It was perfect. Profitable. And vulnerable. Just the way I liked them. As I handed the tablet back, Tessa lingered. You smiled in that fountain, she said, eyes fixed on me. Most people would have snapped, yelled, lashed out. You smiled. I chuckled, a low, dry sound. Because it wasn't the real humiliation. What was? Thinking I ever needed their validation. I took a sip of my coffee and stared out at the skyline. The fountain was just water. Cold. Brief. What they did to me years before. That was the real betrayal. And I survived that. She studied me for a beat. You're not like most clients. No, I said. I never was. Tessa didn't say anything for a moment. Then, more softly, but that night changed you. I watched it. It didn't change me, I said. It revealed me. We both turned toward the edge of the rooftop, where a glass barrier separated us from the drop. A quiet hum of traffic floated upward, but here, it sounded far away, like the past. Some people drown in moments like that, she said, her voice distant. But not you. I thought about that night. The water clinging to my suit. The sound of champagne laughter behind me. Clarissa's triumphant smirk, already picturing the group chat messages she'd send with photos of me flailing in the fountain. I'd felt the cold pierce through every layer of pride I still had. But I didn't react the way they expected. I smiled. I let the moment freeze, and I owned it. No, I answered her. I swam through it. She looked at me, eyebrows raised. And I walked out dry. That silence between us lingered, a soft kind of acknowledgement. The kind you share with someone who's seen your blood on the floor and never asked you to bleed again. I stepped away from the edge and headed back toward the stairwell, coffee in hand. Get a new coat, I said over my shoulder. We've got a press call at noon. Yes, boss, she called after me. By the time I reached the office below, Corin was already waiting in the executive conference room. Crisp suit, neutral expression. On the screen behind him was the company's new homepage, my homepage. Lock Strategic Holdings was now Lockcrest Global, and the landing page had changed overnight. It no longer bore the pristine, magazine-polished face of Clarissa or Mason or any other member of the old guard. It had mine, not a posed portrait, not airbrushed, just me. Standing on the courthouse steps from last week's final hearing, suit damp from a light rain, umbrella folded at my side. Serious, present, real. Beneath the image was a quote I hadn't authorized, but had no intention of removing. Sometimes the man you cast out is the one who rebuilds the house. Corin tilted his head toward the screen. Too dramatic? No, I said, eyes still on the image. Exactly right. He set a folder in front of me. Judge Grant officially recused himself from the trust oversight. Clarissa's assets have been frozen. Mason's involvement is under review. Everything you predicted is unfolding. I opened the folder slowly, scanning the signatures. Every page felt like a brick laid in the foundation of a home I was reclaiming. Not just for me, but for Noelle. And my daughter? I asked. Corin smiled slightly. She's reviewing the Spain program. Asked me to vet the school's financial backing. She trusts you now. Good, I murmured. That's all I ever wanted. That afternoon, I stood at the same fountain I'd been pushed into, not at the estate, but in the park downtown. A similar marble design. Elegant. Circular. A symbolic reminder. But here, I was alone. I leaned on the edge, staring into the water. Clear. Still. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a photo. Noelle at age 6, holding my hand at her school's fall fair. Her smile was big, toothy. I remembered that day. She'd won a prize for naming all the planets in the solar system in order. I let the photo drift down into the fountain, not as an act of letting go, but of honoring the man who never stopped showing up, even when he was uninvited. The water rippled once, then settled. And me? I walked away dry. I still remember the exact moment when my world shattered. The sound of a suitcase zipper slicing through the silence, the clinking of expensive jewelry as she packed, the scent of her designer perfume lingering in the air. The room we once shared, filled with laughter and whispered promises, had turned into a battlefield where I stood alone, outnumbered, outclassed, and utterly disposable. Victoria was leaving me. Her hands moved with mechanical efficiency, folding clothes I had once pulled off her with so much love. No hesitation, no second-guessing, just the cold, ruthless precision of someone who had made up their mind long before they said the words out loud. "Nathan, this isn't working anymore," she said, her voice clipped, devoid of the warmth I once knew. "I can't do this." I swallowed hard, my jaw tightening as I tried to find the right words, but my mind was a chaotic storm of emotions. My wife, the woman who once clung to me in the dead of night, whispering that I was her home, was leaving. Not because I cheated, not because I hurt her, but because I wasn't good enough. Because her family had told her so. I should have seen this coming. Maybe I had. Maybe I just didn't want to believe that the woman I loved could be so easily manipulated by Eleanor Whitmore, the matriarch of the family, a woman who breathed wealth and power the way ordinary people breathed air. She stood by the doorway, arms crossed over her expensive silk blouse, watching this spectacle unfold with a thin, satisfied smile. "You should have known better, Nathan," Eleanor said, voice dripping with the condescending tone she had perfected over decades. "Did you really think this could last? That she would stay with someone who has nothing?" That word, nothing. I clenched my fists. "I'm not nothing," I ground out, my voice rough. "You have no wealth, no connections, no legacy." She gestured around the penthouse, as if it was hers to dismiss. This was temporary. A distraction for Victoria. Victoria flinched at her mother's words, but she didn't refute them, didn't argue, didn't defend me. I turned to her, heart pounding. "You don't really believe that, do you?" She hesitated. That hesitation was a blade to my chest, a slow, agonizing realization that she wasn't just leaving, she was agreeing. "Nathan, you don't understand," she murmured, rubbing her temples like this was hard for her, like she was the one hurting. "No," I snapped, stepping closer. "Explain it to me, Victoria. Help me understand. Because last I checked, we made vows. We built a life together. We fought for this. And now, because your mother thinks I'm not good enough, you're throwing it all away?" She exhaled, closing her eyes briefly before looking at me. "You don't belong in my world, Nathan. You never did." The words hit harder than any punch I had ever taken. I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. "Wow, just like that?" She folded her arms across her chest, as if shielding herself from my disappointment. "It's not just me. It's my father, my brother, my entire family. They'll never accept you. And I." She bit her lip before whispering, "I can't fight them anymore." The final nail in the coffin. I stared at the woman I once thought would stand by me through everything, and suddenly, I saw her for what she really was. Someone who had never been willing to fight for me. Eleanor stepped forward, a victorious gleam in her eyes. "You should leave now, Nathan. Victoria has made her decision." I turned to my wife one last time. "Tell me you don't love me anymore," I challenged, my voice low. "Say it, and I'll walk away." Victoria's throat bobbed as she swallowed, her lips parting, but no words came. "That's what I thought," I muttered. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then, finally, she exhaled and whispered, "This isn't about love. It's about reality." Reality. Her reality was wealth, power, prestige. My reality? Hard work, late nights, and the naive belief that love was enough to bridge the gap between our worlds. I reached into my pocket, my fingers curling around my wedding ring. It felt heavier than ever, like it had absorbed all the weight of my shattered expectations. Slowly, I pulled it off and placed it on the marble counter. The sound of metal meeting stone echoed through the room. "I hope it was worth it," I said, my voice eerily calm. Victoria's eyes flickered with something. Regret? Sadness? Guilt? But it was too late. Without another word, I grabbed my jacket and walked past Eleanor, not sparing her another glance. The scent of her overpowering perfume filled my nostrils, but all I could smell was betrayal. "Goodbye, Nathan," Victoria called softly as I reached the door. I didn't look back. I stepped out of that penthouse, into the cold night air, and stood there for a long moment, breathing it in. I had entered that building as a husband, a believer, a fool. I was leaving as a man who had lost everything. And yet, deep down, beneath the heartbreak, beneath the humiliation, I felt something else stirring, a dangerous, burning ember in my chest, a promise. One day, I would be the man they regretted losing. They would see my name everywhere, spoken with admiration and respect. They would hear whispers of my success, of my rise, of my empire. And when that day came, when our paths inevitably crossed again, I wouldn't need revenge. I would simply smile. Rock bottom isn't a moment. It's a slow, excruciating descent. The night I left Victoria's penthouse, I had nowhere to go. No plan, no safety net, no home. The world outside felt different, colder. The city lights that once held the promise of opportunity and ambition now looked harsh, mocking. I walked for hours, past the sleek glass buildings where men in tailored suits shook hands over multi-million-dollar deals, past the hotels I couldn't afford, past the restaurants where Victoria and I used to dine. By the time I reached Marcus' apartment, my feet ached, and my pride was in shambles. I knocked, and when he opened the door, his face went from annoyance to concern in an instant. "Jesus, you look like hell. Feel like it too," I muttered, stepping past him. His place was a mess. Empty takeout containers, half-folded laundry, a couch that had seen better days. But right then, it was a palace compared to the street. He shut the door and turned to face me. "What happened?" I dropped onto the couch and let out a long breath. "Victoria left me." Marcus didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked vindicated. "Took her long enough." I shot him a glare. "Not the time." He shrugged. "I told you, man. You were playing house with a woman whose family thinks people like us are background characters in their world. You really thought she was going to fight for you?" I hated how much that stung. I shook my head, rubbing my temples. I thought love mattered more than money. Marcus let out a bitter chuckle. "Love's a luxury, bro. Rich people can afford it because they've got nothing else to worry about. Us? We're too busy surviving." His words hit hard because, for the first time in a long time, I was back in survival mode. Marcus grabbed a beer from the fridge and tossed one to me. "You can crash here for as long as you need." "Thanks," I murmured, cracking it open. But the reality of my situation hit the next morning. I woke up on Marcus' lumpy couch to the sound of his shower running and the unmistakable scent of burnt coffee. For the first few minutes, I forgot. Forgot I was no longer in the penthouse. Forgot Victoria had chosen her family over me. Forgot I had nothing. Then it all came rushing back. I reached for my phone. No texts, no missed calls. Victoria was really done with me. I dragged myself to the tiny bathroom, splashed water on my face, and stared at my reflection. Dark circles under my eyes, stubble creeping along my jaw, a look of dull emptiness that I barely recognized. This wasn't me. I needed a job, a place of my own, something. But that's the funny thing about falling from grace. People love to watch, but no one's there to catch you. I sent out dozens of applications that day. Emails, LinkedIn messages, follow-ups to old contacts. Nothing. Calls went unanswered. Messages were read and ignored. It didn't take long to realize why. I had spent the last few years living in Victoria's world, attending events with the Whitmores, making connections in circles where my last name didn't belong. Every opportunity one had was linked to her family's influence. Now that I wasn't her husband, I was just another nobody. By the end of the week, I had depleted what little savings I had left. Rent was out of the question, so I stayed at Marcus' place, humiliated and restless, watching my life disintegrate one unpaid bill at a time. The worst part? I started to believe Eleanor Whitmore was right. Maybe I was nothing after all. 2 months passed, and I had nothing to show for it. Marcus did his best to help. He got me a bartending gig at a rundown pub, just enough to scrape by. But every night, I stood behind that bar, pouring drinks for men who looked like I used to look. Confident, successful, untouchable, and it made me sick. One night, I served a former colleague from the finance firm I once worked at. He didn't recognize me at first. Then his eyes widened. "Nathan? Holy sh*T, man. What are you doing here?" I forced a smirk. "Just, keeping busy." He let out a low whistle. "Damn. Heard about the divorce, but I didn't think it was this bad." I swallowed my pride and shrugged. "Yeah, well, life happens." He glanced around, as if making sure no one else was watching, then leaned in. "Look between us? The Whitmores put out word that you're blacklisted in finance. No one wants to touch you, man." The air left my lungs. "You're joking." He shook his head. They made sure you wouldn't get a second chance. Apparently, Eleanor doesn't want you embarrassing the family name any further. Embarrassing the family name? I had spent years killing myself to be part of their world, only to be tossed aside and erased like I never existed. I barely made it through the rest of my shift. By the time I got home, Marcus was on the couch, flipping through channels. He glanced up. "What's with the face?" I grabbed a beer, took a long swig, then exhaled sharply. "They blacklisted me," I muttered. Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean the Whitmores made sure I'll never work in finance again. They shut every door before I could even knock." Marcus let out a long breath. "Damn." I nodded. "Yeah, damn." We sat in silence for a moment before he turned to me. "So what now?" That was the question, wasn't it? What now? For the past 2 months, I had been playing defense, licking my wounds, waiting for some kind of salvation. But no one was coming to save me. No job offers. No second chances. No lifelines. I had 2 choices: stay bitter and let the Whitmores define me, or burn their entire narrative to the ground. Slowly, I leaned forward, gripping the beer bottle in my hands. "I have an idea," I said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerous." A slow, determined smile crept across my lips. "It is." That night, something changed. I stopped thinking like a victim and started thinking like a man with nothing to lose. The Whitmores thought they had buried me, but they didn't realize I was the kind of man who thrived in the dark, because when you've got nothing left, the only direction to go is up. And I was about to make a comeback they'd never see coming. You know what's funny about hitting rock bottom? At first, it crushes you. The weight of failure sits on your chest, makes it hard to breathe. Every rejection, every closed door, every humiliating reminder of how far you've fallen. It all piles up until you start to believe that maybe this is it. Maybe you were never meant to succeed. Maybe they were right. But then, something shifts. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic movie moment. It happens in the quiet, in the exhaustion, in the final breaking point where you realize that no one is coming to save you. No second chances. No lucky breaks. Just you. And that's when you stop asking for a way back in and start building your own way out. That was the moment I stopped thinking like a man who lost everything and started thinking like a man who had nothing left to lose. And nothing is more dangerous than a man with nothing to lose. I was still broke, still sleeping on Marcus' couch, still stuck bartending at night to afford gas money. But I had an idea. A year before everything fell apart, I had been playing around with an idea for a business management app, a tool that could help small businesses track finances, manage employees, and automate customer engagement. Back then, it was just a concept, something I never had time to develop because I was too busy trying to fit into Victoria's world. Now, I had nothing but time. So I dusted off my old notes, opened my laptop, and started piecing together the skeleton of what would become Vanguard Solutions. I spent days watching coding tutorials, teaching myself everything I didn't know. The app needed to be simple, powerful, and intuitive, something that small business owners, not just corporations, could use. I barely slept. During the day, I worked on the app. At night, I went to the bar, pouring drinks for men who reminded me of who I used to be. It was humiliating, but humiliation is a great motivator. I told myself, one day, I won't be behind the bar. I'll own the whole damn building. After 2 months, I had a working prototype. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to show someone. I didn't have the luxury of a network anymore, so I went where the real hustlers were. Small business meetups, startup events, anywhere entrepreneurs gathered. I walked into my first pitch meeting wearing my only suit, the one I used to wear to Whitmore charity galas, now a little loose on me. The investor, a guy named Daniel Weiss, listened for 5 minutes before cutting me off. "This is solid, but I don't see it competing with bigger firms," he said. "You don't have the resources or connections to scale." I clenched my jaw. "I just need someone to take a chance." He sighed, tapping his pen against his desk. "Nathan, the Whitmores blacklisted you. No one wants to invest in a guy they think is toxic to their social circles. I can't risk my reputation." There it was. I wasn't just some struggling entrepreneur. I was a man with a target on his back. I shook his hand and left, my heart pounding with frustration. It wasn't just rejection. It was deliberate exile. They didn't just want me to fail. They wanted to make sure I never even got a chance to try. So I made a decision. If no one would open a door for me, I would build my own. One night, after another long shift, I stopped by a late-night coffee shop, exhausted and ready to quit for the 100th time. That's when I met Julian Carter. He was sitting at the counter, reading something on his tablet. I wouldn't have noticed him if not for the brief moment when he looked up, stared at me, and said, "You've got the look of a man who's either about to do something stupid or something brilliant." I smirked tiredly. Could go either way. He gestured toward the seat next to him. "Tell me about it." Something in his voice made me hesitate. Not pity, not curiosity, genuine interest. I sat, told him about the app, the rejections, the Whitmores shutting every door. He listened, nodding, barely interrupting until I finished. Then he smiled. "You remind me of myself 20 years ago." I frowned. "You're a billionaire investor. And before that?" He leaned forward. "I was some kid nobody believed in. I know what it's like to fight your way up when the world tells you to stay down." I exhaled sharply. "So what are you saying?" He slid his business card across the counter. "I'm saying, show me a working version of this in 60 days, and I'll consider backing you." My fingers tightened around the card. "Why would you do that?" He grinned. "Because the best investments are the ones everyone else is too blind to see." I worked like a man possessed. Marcus let me turn his tiny apartment into a development lab. Cables everywhere, coffee cups stacked like trophies of exhaustion. I coded, tested, fixed bugs, reworked the UI, and relearned how to hustle. The money I made bartending went into servers, software licenses, everything I needed to get a fully functional version of the app running. I barely ate, barely slept. Failure wasn't an option. Then, on the 59th day, I sent Julian an email. "Meet me tomorrow. It's ready." The next afternoon, I walked into Julian Carter's office, heart hammering. I gave him the demo, showed him every feature, every capability. When I finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "This is good," he said finally. "Really good." I exhaled, waiting. Then he smirked. "All right, I'm in. $500,000 for 20% equity." The air left my lungs. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack." He extended his hand. "What do you say, Nathan? Ready to take the first step toward becoming the kind of man they never saw coming?" I gripped his hand and shook. "Hell yes." That night, Marcus and I sat on his balcony, drinking the cheapest whiskey we could find. "To the comeback," he said, raising his glass. I clinked mine against his. "To Vanguard Solutions." Because this was it. The first step toward building an empire. The Whitmores thought they had erased me. They had no idea. I wasn't just coming back. I was coming back to dominate. There's something surreal about watching your life shift from survival mode to full-throttle acceleration. For months, I had been drowning, struggling just to breathe. Now, I was driving 100 miles an hour, and I had the wheel. Julian Carter's $500,000 investment wasn't just about the money. It was a signal, a green light that someone believed in me, that I wasn't just some discarded failure left in the shadow of the Whitmores. But I didn't let the high of the deal cloud my focus. I knew what this was, an opportunity, not a guarantee. So I worked. Every single day, from sunrise to the dead of night, I poured everything I had into Vanguard Solutions. The first step? Hiring the right people. I couldn't build a tech empire alone. So I handpicked a small, elite team, developers, designers, and business strategists who weren't afraid of risk. People who, like me, had something to prove. People who weren't born into success, but were hungry enough to take it. With the funding secured, we went all in on refining the app. Vanguard Solutions was designed to streamline business operations, bookkeeping, payroll, marketing automation. The kind of software that small businesses desperately needed but couldn't afford from corporate giants. I personally pitched the app to local businesses, knocking on doors, attending networking events, getting rejected more times than I could count. And then, finally, we landed our first major client. Harborview Hotels, a mid-sized hotel chain looking for a simple, scalable management tool. Their COO was skeptical at first. Why should we trust a startup with our entire business system? I looked him dead in the eye. Because we're hungrier than the big guys, which means we'll work twice as hard to make sure you don't regret it. He signed a 6-month trial contract the next day. After Harborview, momentum picked up. More businesses started signing on. Referrals began spreading like wildfire, and soon, Vanguard Solutions was everywhere. Then came the press. One day, I got a call from a journalist at the Financial Post. "We've been hearing about your company's rapid rise," she said. "We'd love to feature you in our Startups to Watch section." I agreed, not realizing just how big of a deal this was. A week later, the article dropped, and suddenly, investors were calling me instead of the other way around. Vanguard Solutions is disrupting the small business software industry with its intuitive, cost-effective model. Founder Nathan Cole, a former finance executive who built his company from the ground up, is proving that innovation doesn't just belong to the billion-dollar firms. There was one sentence that stood out more than the rest. "A man the industry once overlooked is now becoming impossible to ignore." I read that line over and over. Because that was it. I was no longer forgotten. I was becoming a player. It had been nearly a year since I left the Whitmore's world. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was winning. And then, one evening, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I answered. Nathan Cole. A familiar voice filled the line. Victoria. For a second, I froze. Then, I smiled. Victoria. To what do I owe the pleasure? She hesitated. I saw the article about you. Ah, I said, leaning back in my chair. Didn't think you kept up with the business world outside your father's empire. That's not fair, she murmured. I laughed, low and cold. Isn't it? You made your choice, Victoria. She exhaled. I didn't call the fight. I wanted to say I'm proud of you. I stared at the city lights outside my office window, feeling absolutely nothing at her words. There was a time when I would have given anything to hear her say that. But now, it meant nothing. Thanks, I said. But I didn't do this for you. A beat of silence. Can we meet? She asked. I let out a slow breath. Why? I want to talk. Catch up. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. You don't want to catch up. You want to see if I'm still the man you walked away from. Nathan. Goodbye, Victoria. I hung up. Then, for the first time in a long time, I laughed. Because she thought she was reaching out to the same man she left. But I wasn't that man anymore. That man had died the night she walked away. A month later, Vanguard Solutions was invited to the National Business Tech Summit, the biggest corporate networking event of the year. And guess who was sponsoring it? The Whitmore Group. I accepted the invitation immediately. Not out of spite. Not out of revenge. But because I wanted them to see me exactly as I was now. The man they discarded, now standing at the top of the industry without them. The night of the event, I walked into the grand ballroom of the Whitmore International Hotel, dressed in a tailored suit that I bought with my own money. I wasn't just attending this event. I was a guest speaker. As I mingled with investors and CEOs, I felt eyes on me. Not just from Victoria, but from Eleanor Whitmore herself. I turned, meeting her gaze across the room. She looked older, more cautious. She didn't smile. She didn't approach. Because for the first time, I wasn't beneath her. I was beyond her reach. Later that night, as I took the stage to speak, I made sure to look directly at her table. Success, I said, isn't about where you come from. It's about resilience, innovation, and proving that no one, not even the so-called elite, gets to define your worth. The applause was thunderous. As I stepped down from the podium, Eleanor turned away, her lips pressed into a thin line. Victoria just sat there, staring. And me? I walked past them, not as the man they cast aside, but as the man they would never be able to ignore again. Because I had done the impossible. I had beaten them, not with vengeance, not with hatred, but with success. That night, I left the gala with my head held high. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their acceptance. I had built something greater than them, and that was the real victory. Because sometimes, the best revenge is simply proving them wrong. Not just your bank account, Not just your reputation. It changes how people see you, and more importantly, how they treat you. People who once dismissed you suddenly want to reconnect. The same doors that were slammed in your face magically swing open, and sometimes, the ones who walked away find their way back. Which is why it was only a matter of time before I saw Victoria again. A week after the business summit, I was at an exclusive investor networking event. Marcus had practically shoved me into attending, saying, "You need to start rubbing shoulders with the real power players now, man. Play the game." So I played. The venue was a sleek, high-rise penthouse overlooking the city skyline. Servers walked around with crystal glasses of champagne. Expensive suits filled the room, and the air buzzed with power and money. And then, a familiar voice behind me. "Nathan." I turned. Victoria. She looked different. The same polished, elegant exterior, but something about her felt off. Like she wasn't as sure of herself anymore. Like maybe she had realized she made a mistake. I let my gaze drift over her, taking my time. "Nathan," she repeated, like she needed to say my name twice to believe it was really me standing there. I sipped my drink, keeping my expression neutral. "Victoria." A flicker of something crossed her face. Nervousness, uncertainty. "I didn't think I'd see you here," she said, adjusting the strap of her designer clutch. I smiled, slow and deliberate. I'd say the same, but I figured it was only a matter of time. Her brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I took a step closer, lowering my voice just enough. "It means I knew that eventually, you'd come looking." She exhaled sharply. "Nathan, that's not—" "Not what?" I cut in smoothly. "Not what I think. Not because you saw my name on the guest list and suddenly remembered I existed." Her jaw tightened. "You really think that little of me?" I tilted my head, pretending to think. "Well, let's see. A year ago, you told me you wanted nothing to do with me. Walked away without looking back. And now, here you are." She looked away, biting her lip. "Good. Let it sink in." "I made a mistake," she murmured. The words just hung there. I let them sit, let them linger, because I wasn't going to make this easy for her. When I didn't respond, she sighed and took a hesitant step closer. "I thought I was doing what was best. My family." "Ah yes, your family." I let out a low chuckle, shaking my head. "The same people who blacklisted me from my entire industry? The same ones who told you I was nothing? And you agreed?" She flinched. "I didn't agree, You didn't fight," I corrected, my voice calm. "You let them push me out like I was disposable. And now, what? You want to rewrite history?" Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "Nathan, please." She looked at me with something I never thought I'd see in her eyes. Regret. Not pity. Not superiority. Just pure, undeniable regret. But the thing about regret? It's useless when the damage is already done. I leaned in just enough that she had to look up at me. "You know what's funny?" I said quietly. "A year ago, I would have given anything to hear you say you made a mistake." She exhaled. "And now?" I smiled. "Now, I don't care." She blinked, stunned. "Nathan." I took a slow sip of my drink, savoring the moment. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about anger. It was about clarity. The kind that only comes when you finally stop wanting what once destroyed you. "You think we could have a second chance?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. I studied her, pretending to consider it. Then I shook my head. "No." She inhaled sharply. "Just like that?" I laughed. "No, Victoria. Not just like that. Like this." I gestured around us, at the crowd, the event, the life I built without her. "See, the man you left? The one you thought wasn't good enough? He doesn't exist anymore," I said smoothly. "And the man standing in front of you? He doesn't need you." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Because what could she say? She had no power here. No leverage. No second chance. She had lost me. For good. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her clutch bag. "I really did love you," she whispered, like it mattered now. I nodded, smiling slightly. "I know." Her eyes flickered with something. Hope. Maybe. I let her have it. Just for a second. Then I stepped past her, my voice quiet but sharp. But love wasn't enough for you. And now, it's not enough for me. She turned to watch me walk away, her breathing unsteady. And I didn't look back. Not this time. Not ever again. Some people will always think they can come back. That no matter what they did, they'll still own a part of you. Victoria thought that. She thought I was still the man waiting for her to come back. But that version of me? He was gone. And when she realized that, that's when she knew. She didn't just lose me. She lost the best thing she ever had. And that was the best revenge of all. The people who once looked down on you suddenly look up to you. The ones who thought they had all the power, they realize they have none. Victoria must have thought our conversation at the investor event was a one-time thing, a fluke, a coincidence. But life has a funny way of making sure the people who hurt you watch every inch of your success unfold. And now, she wasn't just seeing it. She was on the outside looking in. 2 weeks after the investor gala, Vanguard Solutions landed its biggest deal yet. A $20 million partnership with Roland Enterprises, one of the largest investment firms in the country. The news spread fast. I woke up to calls from reporters, messages from old colleagues, even cold emails from investors who had ignored me months ago. But the best part? The headline that ran across business news outlets everywhere. From blacklisted to billionaire, Nathan Cole's meteoric rise. I read it twice. Then, I laughed. Because the last time my name had been in the media, it was attached to Victoria, to the Whitmore family, to the man they discarded. But now, my name stood on its own. The Roland deal came with one major requirement, an exclusive business summit where I would be a keynote speaker. A night where the biggest players in the industry would be gathered in one room. A night where Victoria, Eleanor, and the entire Whitmore family would be in attendance. When I saw their names on the guest list, I smiled. Because I wasn't going to that event as the man they underestimated. I was going as the man they could never ignore again. The night of the event, I walked into the grand ballroom of the Whitmore International Hotel, a place I once wasn't good enough to belong in. The chandeliers sparkled, champagne glasses clinked, and the room was filled with CEOs, investors, and powerhouses. And then I saw her, Victoria, standing across the room, drink in hand, frozen in place as her eyes locked onto me. She wasn't expecting me. Not like this. Not as a guest of honor. Not as the most talked about name in the industry. She took a slow step forward, hesitated, then changed course, like she didn't know if she could face me again. Smart choice. Because now, she wasn't the one walking away. I was. As I moved through the event, shaking hands, making deals, I caught Eleanor Whitmore's gaze from across the room. The same woman who once told me I was nothing. The same woman who thought she had erased me. Now, she was watching me hold the room. I saw her whisper something to her husband, saw the tension in her shoulders. Because for the first time, she wasn't in control. I was. I was talking to a potential partner when a familiar voice broke through. Nathan. I turned. Victoria. She looked up at me, eyes scanning my face like she was searching for something. The man she used to know, maybe, but he wasn't there. Victoria, I greeted, calm, unreadable. She let out a breath, a small smile tugging at her lips. I wasn't expecting you here. I tilted my head. Why not? Did you think I'd still be bartending? She flinched. Good. I didn't mean. I smirked. Relax. I know exactly what you meant. She shifted awkwardly, tapping her fingers against her glass. I heard about everything you've built. Vanguard Solutions. The Roland deal. It's incredible. I nodded, taking a sip of my drink. It is. Silence stretched between us. She was waiting for something. For me to crack. For me to say that I missed her. For me to give her an opening back into my life. But I wouldn't. Because now, she was just another person in the crowd. You know, she said softly, I've been thinking a lot about us. I raised an eyebrow. Have you? She nodded, biting her lip like she wasn't sure if she should continue. I know I hurt you, she admitted. I know I let my family control me. But, Nathan, when I see you now, I realize I might have made the biggest mistake of my life. I let her words sink in, because they were exactly what I once dreamed of hearing. But now, They meant nothing. I smiled, slow and measured. Victoria, let me ask you something, I said, setting my glass down. She nodded, hopeful. Anything? If I were still struggling, still that man you walked away from, would we be having this conversation? Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. I chuckled. That's what I thought. Her face paled. Nathan, it's not like that. It's exactly like that. I leaned in, voice low. You didn't want me when I had nothing. And now, you want me because I have everything. She swallowed hard. I never stopped loving you. I smiled. That's the difference between us, Victoria. She blinked. I took a step closer, voice steady. You loved me when I was at my lowest. But I only love the version of me that exists now. Her face crumbled. And for the first time since she left me, she looked like the one who was lost. Because she wasn't rejecting me anymore. I was rejecting her. I stepped back, adjusted my cufflinks, and gave her one last nod. Take care, Victoria. She exhaled shakily. Is that it? I smiled. That's all that's left. And then, I walked away. Not because I needed to, but because I could. And that was the moment I knew. She wasn't the one who left me behind. I was the one who outgrew her. Some people will spend their entire lives looking back at what they lost. Victoria would be one of them, because she had a seat at my table once, and she threw it away. Now, she was just another person watching me from the outside. And me? I was exactly where I was always meant to be, at the top, without her. It doesn't come when you demand it. It comes when you no longer need to demand it. For months, I had fought my way out of obscurity, rejection, and betrayal. I had clawed my way back from nothing, built a name, a company, a reputation that people couldn't ignore. And now, I had everything they once told me I would never have. And that meant I could walk away from anything, without looking back. After the investor gala, I thought that was it. That she'd finally gotten the message. That she'd finally accepted that she lost me. But some people, they don't let go until they've exhausted every last opportunity. Which is why, 2 weeks later, I found myself face to face with Victoria once again. I was at the Vanguard Solutions headquarters, finishing up a late-night meeting when my assistant, Olivia, poked her head into the room. Sir, someone's here to see you. I didn't even have to ask. I already knew. I exhaled slowly, leaned back in my chair, and said, send her in. And sure enough, Victoria walked in. She looked nervous, like she knew this was her last chance. I didn't stand, didn't greet her, just watched. Because this time, I wasn't the one fighting to be seen. She was. She hesitated at the door before finally walking in, her heels clicking softly against the floor. This is impressive, she said, looking around the glass-walled office. You've built something incredible. I nodded, expression unreadable. I know. She bit her lip, then met my eyes. Nathan, I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. I already know what you're going to say, I said. You're going to tell me you miss me, that you regret leaving, that you thought you were doing what was best, but now you realize it was a mistake. She swallowed hard. And if I said all of that? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. Then I'd tell you what I told you before. She blinked. Which is? I let out a slow breath. That it's too late. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. For the first time, she was the one feeling the weight of rejection. Victoria sighed, lowering herself into the chair across from me. Nathan, I know I hurt you. Stop, I said firmly. She flinched. I let my gaze settle on her, unyielding. You didn't just hurt me. You threw me away. You made me believe I wasn't worth fighting for. She exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the chair. I thought I was doing what was best at the time. My family. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Your family didn't force you to leave. You chose to leave. Don't blame them for your decision. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Because she knew I was right. She lowered her gaze. I thought you'd be angry, she admitted. I shook my head. I was. For a long time. She swallowed. And now? I smiled. Now, I just don't care. She sucked in a breath, and I saw it. the exact second she realized she had lost me for good, because there's nothing scarier than indifference. Hatred means there's still an emotional connection, but indifference? It means you've already moved on. And I had. A long time ago. She stood up slowly, as if waiting for me to stop her. I didn't. She hesitated. So that's it? I leaned back in my chair. That's all that's left. She let out a soft, humorless laugh. I guess I deserve this. I didn't respond. Because, honestly, she did. She took one last look at me, then shook her head. I really did love you, she whispered. I smiled faintly. Not enough. Her breath hitched, and then she walked away. For the first time, not because she had the power to leave me, but because I let her go. After she left, I sat there for a long moment. Not because I was sad, not because I regretted anything, but because I finally felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Victoria was a chapter in my story, a lesson, but not the ending. And as I looked around my office, at the empire I built without her, I realized I wouldn't change a damn thing, because if she hadn't left, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be this. And that was the greatest gift she could have ever given me. The next morning, I got a text from an unknown number. Victoria, I hope you find happiness, Nathan. I stared at the message for a long second. Then, without hesitation, I deleted it. No response. No lingering thoughts. Just a clean break. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't need to prove anything to her. I had already won. And the best part? I didn't need her to see it. I just needed to keep moving forward. Because the future? It was mine. And I wasn't looking back. Some people will always believe they can come back. That no matter what they did, they'll always have a place in your life. Victoria thought that. She thought she could undo everything with a few well-placed words. But the truth? She lost me the moment she chose to walk away. And now? Now, she was just someone I used to know. And me? I was just getting started. There's a strange kind of silence that comes when you no longer need to prove yourself to anyone. It's not the silence of loss or emptiness. It's the silence of contentment. The kind that tells you you've already won. The day after Victoria walked away for the last time, I woke up to a sky painted in shades of gold and orange. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. No anger. No bitterness. Just peace. She had been a storm in my life once. A force that shook everything I thought I knew. But now, she was just a memory. And me? I was a man no longer haunted by what could have been. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I already knew who it was before I opened it. Victoria, I hope you find happiness, Nathan. I stared at the message for exactly 3 seconds. Then, without hesitation, I deleted it. No response. No lingering thoughts. No second-guessing. Just a clean, effortless erasure. Because what else was there to say? She was a chapter one had already finished reading, and my story? It was still being written. Vanguard Solutions had grown into something even I hadn't anticipated. After the Roland deal, we expanded into multiple industries, retail, hospitality, even healthcare. Investors lined up, eager to be part of the empire I built from nothing. And me? I had gone from being blacklisted by the Whitmores to being one of the most influential names in business. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same circles that once whispered about my failure were now desperate to align themselves with my success. But the best part? I didn't need them. I had built something so solid, so untouchable, that no one's approval could make or break me anymore. A few weeks later, I sat down for an exclusive interview with Forbes. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Maya Grant, studied me for a moment before asking, "So tell me, Nathan, what drives you now?" It was a loaded question. A year ago, my answer would have been revenge. I would have said something about proving people wrong, making the Whitmores regret ever doubting me. But now, I smiled, shook my head slightly, and leaned back in my chair. Honestly, I said, I don't think about them anymore. Maya tilted her head. Not even a little? I chuckled. Not even a little. Her eyes lit up, recognizing the weight of that statement. So what changed? I exhaled. I realized that success isn't about making others regret losing you. It's about making yourself proud of who you've become. She nodded slowly, scribbling something down. That's powerful. It's the truth. And it was. I hadn't built Vanguard Solutions out of spite. I had built it because I wanted more for myself, because I refused to let someone else's rejection define my worth. And the second I stopped living for revenge and started living for my own fulfillment, that was the moment I truly won. A month later, I was invited to speak at the annual Business Innovation Conference, one of the most prestigious industry events in the country. It was the kind of event I would have never been invited to a year ago, the kind where only the elite spoke. And yet, there I was, walking onto that stage as the keynote speaker. As I stood before thousands of executives, investors, and entrepreneurs, I felt none of the nerves I once would have, because I belonged there, because I had earned it. I stepped up to the podium, adjusted the mic, and let my gaze sweep over the crowd. Then, I began. A year ago, I was told I wasn't good enough. The room went still. I was told that my background made me unworthy, that because I didn't come from wealth or power, I would never belong in the circles that define this industry. A murmur ran through the audience. I let the silence sit before continuing. But here's what I learned. Success isn't given, it's built. And the people who try to lock you out, they only win if you let them. The murmurs turned into nods of agreement. I let a small smile touch my lips. I stand here today, not because someone opened a door for me, but because I built my own. The applause started slow. Then it exploded. And in that moment, I knew. I had officially rewritten the narrative. I wasn't the man the Whitmores threw away. I was the man who didn't need them at all. That night, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, looking out over the city. Marcus leaned against the railing beside me, sipping his whiskey. So, what now? I exhaled slowly, watching the skyline glow. Now, I said. Now, I just live. He smirked. No more proving people wrong? I chuckled. I already did that. He nodded. Damn right you did. I lifted my glass. To the life we built. Marcus clinked his glass against mine. To never needing closure from anyone but yourself? I took a sip, letting the warmth settle in my chest. Because he was right. I didn't need Victoria's regret. I didn't need Eleanor's approval. I didn't need anyone to recognize my success except me. And that was the greatest victory of all. Not all victories are loud. Some come in the form of walking away without looking back. Some come in the form of peace. Some come when you finally realize. You don't need closure from the past when you're too busy building your future. And me? I was finally free. Because the only thing more powerful than proving them wrong is realizing you don't have to prove anything at all.